There are count them, 3 organs of the plant: the roots, the stems, and the leaves. Exactly right. So now we're looking at what these organs are made of. We're going to look at the tissue level. So remember, it goes cells get together, form tissue gets together and form organs. So there's 3 tissue systems in all of these organs. The tissue systems are dermal, vascular, and ground. So each plant organ has each of those different kinds of tissue. So here you can see the dermal tissue in, hang on, blue. Sorry, blue. That's the outside of the leaf. If you take a cross section of the leaf, that's where you find the dermal tissue, aptly named. If you take a cross section of the stem, you find the dermal tissue around the outside. If you take a cross section of the root, that's where you find the dermal tissue. It's on the outside. It's got many different functions. Most of those functions involve protecting the plant in some way. The vascular tissue shown here in purple. And that is scattered. So here, this is a monocot, so that's branching. Oh no, it's a dicot branching. And the vascular tissue in a cross section is shown there. Here it's a dicot, so it's shown as a ring. And in the root, the vascular tissue is in the center. Ground tissue is also known as pith in some cases, if it's in the center here. It's the other tissue, so it's the in-between tissue, and it has various functions. So dermal tissue consists of epidermis and periderm, and the vascular system carries out long-distance transport between roots and shoots. There's 2 kinds of tissues in that vascular system, xylem and phloem. Xylem, which takes water from the roots to leaves and stem. Always remember that. Xylem reaching to the sky. And phloem is the vascular tissue that transports sugars. From leaves to stems and roots. Flowing flows down. Vascular tissue. So xylem to the sky, water, dissolved minerals upward, phloem, organic nutrients to where they're needed. And ground tissue has all kinds of functions: storage, photosynthesis, and support. So tissue, as you know, is made up of cells. So the cells in this case, like any multicellular organism, there's cellular differentiation, the specialization of cells for particular functions. Types of plant cells include Parenchyma, Collenchyma, Sclerenchyma, water conducting cells of xylem, and sugar conducting cells of phloem. 5 different kinds of plant cells. Parenchyma cells, as you can imagine, this is a parenchyma cell. It is full of what structure? What is the name of the structure inside? What are those structures called? Hang on, I'm going to bring up the chat here. Chloroplasts, good, yeah. So I've had people have had to go for exams. Thank you for staying though, that's very nice. One can understand the exam situation. Yeah, chloroplasts. And what is the function of chloroplasts? That's okay. They're chloroplasts. So the chloroplast function in photosynthesis. Yeah, so parenchyma cells function often, but not always, in photosynthesis. Collenchyma cells are such that they're thick. So they're thicker than the parenchyma cells. They're unevenly thickened. So these cells are thicker than other cells, the cells in the middle there. And they can differentiate into lots of different kinds of cell types. So like if you were, for example, well, for parenchyma cells, if you were to take one parenchyma cell and put it into a petri dish with some appropriate chemicals, and grow a whole plant. So with the right environment, it can divide and differentiate into loads of different kinds of cells. Can differentiate into many kinds of cells. Yeah. What else happens? I'm just going to concentrate on parenchyma for a second. I found some notes to read. This is some things I can't remember off the top of my head. Besides photosynthesis, they do have some other functions. So they contain plastids, and plastids are little storage vesicles inside the cell to store starch. That's something else parenchyma has. Fruit is mostly, wait, I won't put it there. Fruit is mostly parenchyma cells. That makes up fruit. Yeah, okay, collenchyma. Usually the collenchyma cells are structural. They help to provide structure to young stems. Yeah. So petioles, for example, tend to have strands of collenchyma. So they don't restrain. So structural without restraining growth. Sclerenchyma, though, is quite thick. So sclerenchyma is thickened with lignin. Lignin, which is it's sort of a latex, really, almost kind of a rubber. And they support. That is their function. Is support. And unlike the collenchyma cells, they cannot elongate. I don't know if you know this. I don't think I've said it before. We're going to talk about it a little bit more when we get to growth. But plants grow in two ways. Their cells differentiate, but also their cells elongate. So there's two ways in which plant growth can occur: cell differentiation and cell elongation. So there's two kinds of cells. There's the scleroid cells, the fiber cells. The scleroids are very thick. So the scleroid cells, like cells rather, for example, for secondary walls, they're very thick, like they're the walls of when you eat nuts, for example. They're the hardness of nutshells and seed shells. The other ones, the fibers, what are the fibers for? The fibers, well, that's what hemp is made of. Hemp is made of Sclerenchyma cells that are fibrous cells, making rope and linens. The cells that conduct water are xylem, sugar conducting, or phloem. So interestingly, you know, remember we did capillary action? So we showed capillary action with those really, really teeny capillary tubes. Well, these are even smaller tubes. They're really just one cell width. This is one cell. And that's one cell, and this is another cell here. And in between these cells are pores. Those are pores that allow the water to go from one cell to the next. They're perforated. So those are part of the water conducting xylem. They're called vessel elements. And they're partially perforated. Yeah. They're wider and shorter. They're like micropipes, really. Tracheids is the other kind of cell. And they, on the other hand, have pits. And water flows from one cell to another. The cells of the phloem are known as sieve tube members and companion cells. So this is a sieve tube member here, like so, also perforated. So fluid can flow freely from one cell to another. But these cells here are dead at maturity, but these ones are not. The companion cells. The companion cells have a nucleus, as you can see, so they can provide whatever the sieve tube cells require. But the sieve tube cells themselves don't have nuclei. So just like you've heard of stem cells, we talked about stem cells, I think, a little bit in cell biology. So stem cells are the precursor to whatever cells they're going to become. They're undifferentiated and non-functional. So in plants, we call them meristems. Meristems. So apical meristems are at the tips of roots and in the buds of shoots, and they elongate the shoots and roots through primary growth. Lateral meristems, on the other hand, add thickness to woody plants. So woody plants are generally quite wider in girth than your regular herbaceous plants. So this plant here, this is a geranium. You can see it's thick and woody, it's hard. Yeah, but this plant here, this is a herbaceous plant. And it's not woody, it just has a thin stem. So some are woody, they have quite a girth. And that's by secondary growth. One thing that's very interesting about plants, I don't think it says that anywhere else, I'll just write it down here. Plants have what's known as indeterminate growth. In other words, they'll just grow their whole lives. They never stop growing. Flowers are determinate. Flowers and leaves. But the stems and roots are indeterminate. So they will keep growing their entire lives and they can continue growing. It doesn't mean they're immortal, but it does mean that they can keep growing. Yeah. So there's different kinds of growth. We call annual plants a complete life cycle in a year. So a life cycle is from seed to death, basically. From germination, a life cycle is a seed germinates, grows to adulthood, and produces seeds and dies. So that's one life cycle. So annual plants just have one life cycle in 1 year. Biennial plants span 2 years. They have a 2-year cycle. Lots of trees and shrubs and grasses have are biennial. Lots of vegetative growth. So strike what I just said. Sorry. Biennial plants often have 1 year of growth and 1 year of flowering. And then they die. So a local one is your salmonberry. So that's a local one. Let's see, what else do we have? Perennials. I jumped the gun. I was talking about perennials. Perennials. Those are lifetime. They will continue to grow. They have no specific limit to life cycles. Yeah, they'll flower every year, usually maybe every 2 years, but they'll flower their whole lives. They'll produce seeds. If they die, it'll be from something else. So we'll die of infection or being consumed or fire, but not of old age. Yeah. So perennials are lots of trees are perennials. Lots of grasses are perennials. Yeah, and this Valentine's Day, I hope you have somebody whose love is perennial. I think that's a line from Shakespeare. My love is as perennial as the grass. Yeah, so one reason for the indeterminate growth is that meristems are basically perpetual embryonic tissue. Perpetual, in other words, they're always around. Yeah. So primary growth, there's a difference between primary and secondary growth. Primary growth is your initial tip of the stem or tip of the root growth. That's primary growth. Secondary growth is adding width or girth. So primary growth is growth in length, and secondary growth in stems is girth or width, increasing the width of a plant. Yeah, so why? Well, primary growth is so that the plant can reach more sunlight. For the stems, primary growth for the roots is to reach more water and nutrients. And secondary growth is for structural integrity and in order to support the plant when it grows. So primary growth to reach sun, to reach water and nutrients. And secondary growth to support height. The plant, as it grows, will get heavier and heavier. So in woody plants, primary and secondary growth occur simultaneously, but in different locations. So here's your node, internode, nodes. In this particular plant, this is a deciduous plant, and the leaves have fallen off, and it leaves a leaf scar. But between nodes, there are leaf scars, and you can tell that this is a 1-year growth. So that's how you can tell the age of some plants by looking at their leaf scars. These are scars left by terminal bud scales from previous years, winters, when the leaves fell off. So primary growth lengthens roots and shoots. And it gets a little complicated, but this is a root that's growing. And one thing about roots, they're growing through soil, and soil is there's a lot of friction in soil. So they have a protective root cap. And this is the zone where the cells are dividing. And this is a zone where the cells are just simply elongating. And up here, the cells are mature and they're starting to grow root hairs, which are a little bit like cilia, really, that are growing out from the cells. So the roots pushing through soil, primary growth. And it produces epidermis, ground tissue, and vascular tissue when the roots are growing. So in young roots, it depends on whether the plant is a monocot or a dicot. So this is a monocot root. Here's a ring of transport cells, xylem and phloem. Gymnosperms and dicots, sometimes they're known as eudicots. There's a cylinder consisting of a lobed core. So in the dicot, the vascular cylinder is in the middle. These are the vessel elements and the tracheids. So what's quite interesting is that the lateral roots will grow from tissue. This tissue on the outside here is called paracycle tissue. And this will grow roots out to the side. Grows lateral roots. So here's a root growing out. The shoot apical meristem looks like that. These are leaf primordia here. This is a developing vascular strand here. And these are little axillary buds here. In the stems, in gymnosperms and the dicots, the vascular bundles are in rings like so. That's a cross section. And the monocot stems, they're scattered. Leaves are really interesting. They have a really important function, but I'm not going to talk about those functions. You know why? Because it's 6 o'clock. So instead, I'm going to stop right there. Thank you for watching.